All right, now we turn to the first slide set in segment 4, the battle between Angleton and Golitsyn. It happened on 29 June 1964 in an all-day showdown and battle of wits over whether or not to work with Bruce Sollie. The approaching disaster. Angleton failed to suspect Solie's perfidy after his disaster with Philby. In 1964, the CIA's clandestine service was approaching a sharp drop-off comparable to the likes of the great African Rift Valley. The fauna living there would have no sense of the turmoil awaiting them. The same turned out to be true for the CIA's counterintelligence chief, Angleton, and Soviet Russia Division Chief Dave Murphy. They had no sense of Golitsyn's concerns about working with Sollie. But Angleton and Murphy were not roaming animals on the Serengeti. They should have sensed, well, and perhaps they did, that Golitsyn's reticence to work with Sollie was like a canary in a coal mine, a warning that Sollie had something devious in mind. But Angleton could not have foreseen the details of Operation Kitty Hawk and how it would destroy the CIA's capability against the Soviet target. Angleton would fail to force Golitsyn to work with Sollie. On 29 June 1964, Anatoly Golitsyn was interrogated by the chief of the counterintelligence staff, James Angleton. Also present were Ray Roca, Angleton's research associate, who also happened to be the case officer for Golitsyn. And there was also Soviet Bloc Division Chief Dave Murphy. In the 8 recordings with Golitsyn made on that day, by the way, the first recording is missing, a high-energy dispute came up repeatedly in an otherwise wide-ranging discussion that covered events before and after Golitsyn's defection back on 15 December 1961. During this battle, Golitsyn found himself engulfed in a feisty argument with his interrogators. During that debate, an historic piece of evidence surfaced concerning the leak of Golitsyn's investigative playbook to the KGB. Golitsyn bluntly told Angleton and Murphy that his defection was the reason that the KGB immediately had begun preparations in January and February of 1962 to send Nosenko in March of that year to a disarmament conference in Geneva for a covert provocation against the CIA. Angleton and Murphy were frustrated by Golitsyn's suggestion that his information went to the KGB because of Angleton's collaboration with Sollie. Angleton worshipped Sollie as much as he had adored Kim Philby. The explosion triggered by Golitsyn's defection had gripped the Western spy services for the next 3 tumultuous years from 1962 to 1964. The fallout spawned battles in Washington, Paris, and London. One of those battles that took place was within the CIA and went virtually unnoticed all these years. It took place, as I said, in June 1964. Angleton worked directly with Sollie. The reason he always did so was because the vaunted spectacle legend of the CIA had no inkling that Sollie was a reincarnation of Philby. But Sollie was far more dangerous. Unlike Philby, Bruce Sollie had never been under suspicion. That was still the case in June 1964, and it remains so today. In his 1964 interrogation, Golitsyn aired his concern that during the spring of 1962, the KGB had been provided with the details of his own ongoing investigation, including what information he had specifically asked the CIA to provide him. The transcript of the 1964 Golitsyn meeting was like a Rosetta Stone in the Angleton-Sollie relationship. As the day wore on, Angleton treated Golitsyn like a novice. Angleton grew impatient, and he gave this demeaning lecture to Golitsyn. Don't get the impression that this is shoved around the division. The whole point is that there is a reason. There's a separation among the counterintelligence staff, the Soviet Russia division, and the Office of Security. And in this case, everything that pertains to the suspicions regarding any employee is within the jurisdiction of the Office of Security. Inevitably, Golitsyn's preconditions for working with Sollie and the pressure from Angleton and Murphy that he had to do so would end up in a stalemate. Over and over again, both sides refused to budge all afternoon. Angleton was the loser for failing to take Golitsyn seriously. And Golitsyn came out the better because he pushed back, undaunted by the status of the CIA counterintelligence chief. So the Angleton-Golitsyn fiasco took place at the same time the KGB went on the warpath. None of what Golitsyn was trying to warn Angleton and Murphy about seemed to be registering with them. They were intent on breaking Nosenko into admitting he was lying by a harsh interrogation. And incredibly, at the same time, Angleton and Murphy were unaware that Sollie was planning to certify Nosenko as bona fide. This moment was the beginning of a perfect storm. The date of that crucial interview with Golitsyn on 29 June 1964 fell in between three significant events. The session occurred 7 months after the death of President Kennedy, 5 months after Nosenko's physical defection shortly after Kennedy's murder, and just 3 months before the final report of the Warren Commission endorsing the myth that Oswald acted alone in the killing of President Kennedy. During this battle, Golitsyn was in a tough spot and unwilling to pander to Sollie, whom he suspected was part of the problem, if not the real problem himself. Inside of the CIA, no one but Sollie and his pal Leonard McCoy knew that all hell was about to break loose. And for his part, Golitsyn tenaciously insisted that he be given important CIA files. The secret information he asked for included files of active American agents in Moscow and all information about American operations in Moscow. Those files had not been shared with Golitsyn. That was probably because they contained details that Sollie did not want Golitsyn to know about. Golitsyn smelled trouble, and he was avoiding Sollie like the plague. The principal repository for those highly classified agent and personnel files was in the CIA Office of Security under Sollie's control, in the research branch of the security research staff. Sollie was the chief of that important, crucial component. Nothing came in or went out from the research branch that Sollie did not know about. And no actions were taken by that branch without Sollie's approval. Golitsyn was certain that his requests for information about the secret CIA files had been leaked to the KGB. To repeat, Golitsyn aired his concern that the KGB had been provided during the spring of 1962 with the details of his own ongoing investigation, including what information he had specifically asked Angleton to provide him. As Golitsyn put it, we cannot exclude that the KGB got information that I had made suggestions to American intelligence, saying that I want to get files of active agents for examination. As I recall, I made such suggestions at different times, but I especially recall it was a very hot topic of conversation in that summer of 1962. Golitsyn was angry over the fact, left unsaid in order not to invite scorn, that Angleton had leaked his playbook to Sully in early 1962. Moreover, the files Golitsyn was seeking from American intelligence were leaked and conveyed to Gribanov in Moscow just in time to use them to revise Nosenko's script for the provocation against the CIA in Geneva. Angleton's ego could not handle such resolute pushback, and he began browbeating Golitsyn. And Murphy chimed in, telling Golitsyn the way it works at CIA. During tape 4 of the interview, Golitsyn gave Angleton this reminder. Yes, it's just what I have asked for from the beginning. Give me all the information about your operations in Moscow. That reminder piqued both Murphy and Angleton, as this high-energy exchange makes clear. Murphy explained, this is the way it works. I give operational information to Sully when it pertains to personnel and if it pertains to personnel. Sully has this backlog of information he wants to review with you on individuals. We keep well informed. I am well informed. But Murphy knew nothing about Sully's false mole hunt or his scheme. Murphy and Angleton double-teamed Golitsyn again, accusing him of holding up Sully's important work. During a discussion about a Norwegian woman, Golitsyn asked Angleton to give him her files. And Angleton just sort of exploded. But you see, once again, I think we're off base. This is one reason why Bruce Sully, for the last month, has wanted to get together with you. So we'll go over the papers he submitted. Murphy and Angleton then piled on Golitsyn again. Murphy said, well, Jim, you're absolutely right that as soon as possible, Sully should get together with Anatoly. Angleton, yes, I understand that part. But this all comes out of the papers that Sully's pulling together and shoving up here all the time. Sully's working with the FBI on all the cases. These investigations are going on very actively. And Sully's holding up many things until he's had the opportunity to sit down with you, Golitsyn, and to go into these matters. Sully has many things he wants to talk to you about because until he sees you, the investigations are being held up. Angleton began to lose his temper over what he thought was Golitsyn's continuous prevarication about working with Sully. Angleton declared, the area chiefs do not have any jurisdictional responsibility in terms of the investigation of CIA personnel. That rests with the Office of Security, it rests with the FBI, and it rests with my outfit. And Bruce is the #1 investigator on all matters of personnel and of penetrations of the agency. So that the sooner that he can sit down with you on these matters, the better. He's the one who is working with the FBI on them. And after that tongue lashing, the rest of the interview was irrelevant small talk. With one great big exception. I mentioned the Angleton-Solie Rosetta Stone. Well, here it is. At one point that afternoon, Angleton, browbeating Golitsyn, made this comment. The sooner you get together with Solie, the better. To be very frank about all this, his office is the one office that I am not frightened about in terms of penetration. And that was Angleton's bottom line on Bruce Solie. Okay, now we come to slide set A11. The quest for Popov's mole, the evidentiary hierarchy, provenance, authenticity, and independent attestation. The challenge of establishing independent attestation in political science research. In political science, normal, straightforward political and military approaches to evidence sometimes leads to difficulty in attempts to follow the principles of both provenance and authenticity. And so a standard historical pedagogy can be problematic in Cold War research. An evidentiary hierarchy is needed based on a number of independent sources in any investigation. An essential methodology in the study of Cold War spy services is crucial. The problem is deception in counterintelligence and espionage operations. In Cold War research, military and political conflicts cannot be easily, if at all, separated from the concomitant conflicts between the spy services of the major powers. This problem arises from the necessity of deception in counterintelligence and counterespionage operations. In such operations, a premium must be afforded to the compartmentalization of intelligence information and to the protection of sources used to penetrate rival spy services. Construction of a 5-layered hierarchical pyramid for the prospect that Bruce Solie could have been Popov's mole follows. At the base of the pyramid is level 5. Concerns the evidence of a higher KGB mole in the CIA. Chapter 5 in Uncovering Popov's Mole makes clear that there is an overwhelming multiple independent attestation that such a mole existed and was never uncovered. Independent sources include Popov himself, of course, Vladislav Kovshok, Anatoly Golitsyn, and Sergei Kondrashev. Besides the activities of Bruce Solie, there are also 4 dependent or minor sources connected to CIA counterintelligence chief Angleton: Scotty Myler, Ray Roca, Pete Bagley, and Edward Epstein. At level 4, discussed above, we find proof that the KGB sent a false defector, Yuri Nosenko, to Geneva to counter Golitsyn's December 1961 disclosures. In the spring of 1962, multiple independent attestation proves that Oleg Gribanov, chief of the KGB Second Chief Directorate, sent Nosenko to Geneva as a provocateur. Golitsyn defected to the CIA on 15 November 61 and was placed in the custody of counterintelligence chief Angleton. Anatoly's defection seriously damaged the KGB's previous use of false pretexts, created during 1958 to arrest Popov. The defection was also a threat to the identity of the KGB mole in the CIA, Solie. The KGB reacted by sending Yuri Nosenko to Geneva as a provocateur against the CIA. His mission was to discredit Golitsyn and protect the source used to certify Popov's treason. That source was the KGB mole in the CIA, who had also been used to obtain compromising information from Popov's assignments in Europe to help create pretexts for his arrest. Level 3, discussed above, shows that the KGB dispatched Nosenko to the U.S. after the JFK assassination to deny any Soviet interest or use of Oswald. The USSR feared U.S. nuclear attack due to their keen interest in and use of Oswald as an agent in Minsk. Nosenko was not a bona fide defector when he was dispatched to the United States in 1964. He had been a provocateur in 1962, and he was a false defector in 1964. Nosenko falsely claimed that he had personal, not to say intimate, knowledge of the stay in the Soviet Union of Lee Harvey Oswald, who 2 months earlier had allegedly assassinated President Kennedy. It was not long before the CIA discovered that Nosenko had never heard about Oswald until after Kennedy and Oswald were dead. Ironically, Oswald, the putative assassin of President Kennedy, and unable to defend himself, had become even more radioactive in death than when he was alive. Level 2, discussed above, is evidence of a communication link from the mole in the CIA through Paris to the KGB in Moscow. Golitsyn had complained that soon after his January 1962 interrogation with Angleton, the KGB knew all about what he had said to Angleton. At the time, Grievenoff was desperate to receive crucial intelligence from the CIA, and Mikhail Tsimbal and a senior CIA case officer who worked in the Office of Security both traveled to Paris. Tsimbal went there to meet with KGB spies, high in French intelligence. We know that from Pete Bagley and his KGB sources. And the officer from the CIA Security Office ends up, of course, being Bruce Soley. We know this because of Soley's travel records. They prove it. So why did Tsimbal go there? There is strong evidence, double independent attestation, that a leak from Washington ended up in Moscow. So we arrive at the top of the pyramid, level 1, the case for the identification of Bruce Soley as the KGB mole in the CIA. Below is a list of evidence examined throughout Volume 4, Uncovering Popov's Mole, and summarized in Chapter 15. Each one of these in itself is a strong case that have been discussed and proved throughout my work in Volume 4, Uncovering Popov's Mole. So I'll just list them here. Number 1, the characteristics of a high echelon staff level officer in the CIA has been attested to independently many ways. And the same is true for Solly's base in Zurich, Switzerland in February and March 1957, and his design of a false mole hunt in 1958. It is also true for Solly's base in Paris and Geneva during May and June of 1962, and of Solly's KGB Kitty Hawk agenda overlay in 1964 to 1967. And finally, it is also the case for the Philby-Sully continuum and James Angleton's fall into infamy. I have a little addendum to add at the end of this particular slide set. And it's a quote from Pete Bagley just before he died. That Bruce Solly provided rock-like protection to Nosenko, there is no doubt. Why is the question? Well, the bond was sealed by Nosenko's marrying Solly's wife's sister. So let's add Solly to the short list. A very interesting observation that came very late in Bagley's life. Well, I think it's fitting, well, it may seem a little bit strange, to finish with the foreword to Volume 4, Uncovering Popov's Mole by Malcolm Blunt. And so I'm going to read it in the third person here. A deep and complex story waiting to be told. The Cold War was energetically and pervasively waged from the end of World War II through the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. Its most dangerous, highest risk potential for nuclear Armageddon was a period of 16 years between 1959 and 1975, within which Lee Harvey Oswald underwent an extraordinary 4-year transition from probable false defector to alleged presidential assassin. By focusing an intense, multifaceted lens on every available aspect of the Cold War, this volume, number 4 in the continuing series, may be our best collective effort thus far to examine and explain Oswald's transition and quite a lot more that has until now been largely overlooked. Conspiracies and theories in connecting the dots. Every theory, no matter how absurd, is supported by its own special dream logic, which I define as the human mind's ability to believe and rationalize just about anything it conceives. As a defense against those who argue anything is possible, John Newman is fond of the term multiple attestation. So am I. For nearly 6 years, we have witnessed the proliferation of highly individualized conceptions of one man's identity, who was Lee Harvey Oswald. From the Warren Report in 1964 all the way up to the present day, range and diversity of opinion about Oswald has emerged from a doctored, incomplete, fractured documentary record, which is then reflected, quite naturally, within a fragmented field of assassination researchers. As such, it comes as no surprise that such division plays out as a consequence of bias, wishful thinking, deliberate misdirection, fraud, misinterpretation, illogical inferences, and most of all, the conceit of certainty, by which we find ourselves still grappling to ascertain fundamental answers to fundamental questions. But all is not lost. There is good news in that we now have access to the greatest number of assassination-related records any generation has ever known. We also have some of the best minds of our time following leads which, until recently, could not have been developed or pursued. Shadow and light. A paradigm shift occurs when a current framework or system is rendered obsolete. The progress to which scientists and historians devote their lives is earned by working within the most current system. Occasionally, but not very often, something happens that challenges the prevailing wisdom by overturning what had been regarded as unquestionable. New facts create new questions which give birth to new models and new hypotheses. A great deal of this book will fall into that rare category of new paradigm. To access this new paradigm, John must first introduce to the reader a detailed chronology of Cold War deceptions, KGB versus CIA, spy versus spy, bona fide defectors versus false defectors, advocates versus detractors, true mole hunts versus false mole hunts. This lesson will prove to be essential if we are to understand the context of what is new in relation to what must be replaced. The subversion of routinely generated paperwork associated with Oswald's 1959 defection to the USSR, which should have been disseminated to the various relevant desks of the CIA's Soviet-Russia division, is something we have struggled to understand. For some number of years, we have speculated as to why those materials seem to have gone sideways to the Office of Security, and just who within the agency had the necessary foreknowledge of Oswald's defection and the authority to alter the standard distribution trajectory. What follows within the pages of this volume will go a long way toward answering those questions once and for all. What does this change? The resurrection of Pete Bagley's plea to remember the ghosts of the spy wars, to pick up where he left off and to bring new focus to the issue of uncovering Popov's mole is, for me, an almost unimaginably significant development. The serendipity of my role, quite unintentional, of serving as a conduit to connect John Newman to Pete Bagley is, shall we simply say, an interesting turn of fate. 8 years after Pete's passing, there arises a symbiotic relationship between my dear friends, two atypical thinkers with many shared qualities of distinction. What I got from Pete Bagley was his brilliant intellect, clarity, personal and professional integrity, and despite being drenched by the muck of very dirty internal politics over the Nosenko business, loyalty to the agency. What I get from John is his deep interest and enthusiasm and his innate ability to interpret the complexities inherent within the world of espionage. I thank John for his extraordinary mental capacity as an experienced military intelligence analyst, his belief in Pete, and for his dedication to the cause. In the case of the figure being considered as a legitimate suspect in John's investigation, the identity of the ghost being considered is a legitimate suspect for Popov's high-ranking KGB mole in the CIA, and was perhaps the most successful penetration of any intelligence service during the entirety of the Cold War. This ghost didn't live in the shadows. He was the shadow. In summary, in answer to the above question, what does this change? The answer, I think, is quite a lot. The mole hunt wrought catastrophic consequences to the agency for more than a decade. When viewed as a calculated misdirection being run by the mole himself, what does that mean in relation to the utilization of Oswald as bait? There are staggering ramifications, the scope and depth of which may take years to unfold. As Alan Dale has said, regarding this path, unearthed by Peter Dale Scott, inspired by Pete Bagley, now being illuminated by John Newman, a new door is about to open.